I'm Dean Spade. Welcome to Love in a Fucked Up World, where we talk about how to build and sustain strong connections with each other, because our resistance movements are made of our relationships and are only as strong as they are. Before we dive into this episode, I want to tell you that I just got news from Verso that the second edition of Mutual Aid has arrived in their offices. I wrote a new preface for the second edition, which reflects on what I've learned about mutual aid since the book first came out in 2020, both the challenges that face mutual aid organizers and some things that help. I've been posting some excerpts from the new book on our podcast Patreon page at patreon.com/DeanSpade. And you can also buy the book directly from us on Patreon, which helps keep the podcast going. We are listener supported, and we welcome your support on Patreon by becoming a Patreon, though you can also access all the content there for free. And we also encourage you to buy my books through the Patreon or buy t-shirts or stickers or mugs or anything else to kind of help us keep this thing going. I'm so excited to share this conversation with Peter Gelderloos. It was a very special one for me because we got to actually get together in person, and you can watch the video of our conversation on YouTube if you want to see it. I really admire Peter's work so much, and I can't begin to state how significant his writing has been on my political development and how I think about things. I encourage everyone not just to read his books, all of which you can find for free on the Anarchist Library, but also to look for other podcast interviews with him. He's just a really interesting person. I always learn so much when I listen to him talk about his ideas. We'll link a bunch of his work, including some recent video projects that I really love, and his books and interviews in the show notes. I'm so delighted to be sitting here with Peter Gelderloos, my friend and someone from whom I have been learning for at least 2 decades. Thank you for joining me for the podcast.
I'm so excited to be here, excited to be hanging out with you and talking with you, and yeah, myself absolutely thrilled.
Yeah, and in person. It's so rare to meet any of our friends in person.
Yeah, is this real?
It's real.
It's real.
It's happening. Snacks were eaten. Yeah, I don't know if everybody listening knows about your work from before. Your work has been very, very central to my political development and to my teaching. I've always taught you books to, I don't even know how many dozens and dozens of classes of students, because I find that it's so pragmatic, full of examples, and totally mind-bendingly radical in this way where like every sentence is like this, that relief you feel when someone describes your experience but opens up a critical window. Like that feeling is what I want my students to have so badly, and like your work has provided to me so often. So I want to like talk a little bit through some of the threads in your work that I think are really relevant to the moment that we're living in here in 2025. And the place I wanted to start was a conversation we were having earlier today. We're having this conversation just after the No Kings protests in the US in mid-October 2025. And the first book I ever read by you was your book, How Nonviolence Protects the State, which I still highly recommend and teach every semester, and also is free and available online. And I wondered if you would just talk through, like, how are you seeing narratives about pacifism circulating in the second Trump presidency and in different ideas of resistance to it? And like, what are your concerns with how they're floating around now? If they harken back to longer term patterns, I would love to hear about that.
It's simultaneously scary and frustrating, and also if we're able to find the patience or a little bit of grace or just curiosity for conversations, potentially a little motivating or heartening to be able to have, more opportunities to have this conversation. That I guess I'm talking to myself now. We don't have to see it as like, God damn it, do we have to have this conversation again? There are features of the society that we live in that constantly produce social amnesia, that constantly rupture the relationship or the connections between generations, that rupture the relationship between our present selves and our past selves. And so that's a society of forgetting. I don't think we should look at things like knowledge or strategies or thoughts about how to make a revolution, how to change society, how to destroy all of these structures, all of these institutions that are literally killing us. We shouldn't approach any of those questions as something with a final answer, but also we absolutely shouldn't approach them as something in which one answer is as good as another. in which the past has nothing to say to the present or the future, because it has so much to say. All of our histories have so much to say to the future, and having to constantly reinvent the wheel, yeah, that's not even the best metaphor, because like, really creative things could happen from trying to reinvent the wheel, and you probably won't come up with a better shape to the wheel, but you'll certainly learn things. This, however, is a situation in which we're facing all of these horrible, horrible forms of oppression and violence and marginalization and silencing, and the institutions that are responsible for that hold all the power in the equation, are also educating us about how to resist their power, how to fight back against them. And that's aggravating. In 2020, nobody was taking nonviolence seriously, because nonviolence isn't something that should be taken seriously. And now when I talk about nonviolence, I'm always talking about a totalizing approach to struggle, not somebody doesn't want to hurt anybody, somebody doesn't personally want to riot, but they think that we are going to achieve social transformation if everybody stays peaceful, if nobody uses violence. It doesn't even matter what definition of violence you use. It's this totalizing approach. Every single time that is being used for truly transformative revolutionary ends, it has been proven lacking. It has been unable to deal with repression. It has been unable to hold and transform space. It's never the exact same conversation. When I wrote the book, yeah, I guess I was like writing around 2004, 2005. It was, after the largest anti-war movement, the largest of any kind of protest movement in human history, and also the one that killed itself the fastest, and it killed itself through, in almost every city where it cropped up, exclusive nonviolence. Whereas in most other movements, these movements aren't actually nonviolent, but afterwards they get characterized that way. So in that sense, we were facing like a situation of total pacification, and a very strong belief by so many people that nonviolence was ethically superior, that it was tactically superior, that it was effective. Now what we're seeing, just 5 years after 2020, during the anti-police uprisings, in which nobody was ridiculous enough to say that, nonviolence was going to work against police racism and police murders. There's a lot more kind of the sort of centrist wing of anti-fascism and more conspiracy theories. This, I think, equally absurd and naive idea that, Trump and company or other far-right organizations or movements need a provocation. And so if someone, throws a rock or throws a bottle in a protest, only then will the police attack us. Only then will the fascists attack us. Only then will, they criminalize our organizations. Will they punish us for expressing our ideas? That's, the far right never needs a provocation, and they don't operate from a place of reason. They take power proactively more and more and more, as much as they can get, until we stop them. So yeah, the conversations are a little bit different, but it's so depressing from you personally, after putting so much work into this. There are situations when you disagree with someone, but they're coming at you with actual historical evidence. There are other situations when you're making the same argument over and over again for 2 decades, and you have never once heard someone use new arguments, actually engage with the arguments you're making, when, if they are making any references to history, it's pure fabrication. Saying that the independence movement in India was completely nonviolent, the civil rights movement in the US, completely nonviolent, that the Nazis burned down the Reichstag to give Hitler the provocation that he needed to take power. It was a council communist, Marinus van der Rubbe, who burned down the Reichstag because that was the right goddamn thing to do. Because these were fucking Nazis who were already murdering lots of people. They didn't need any pretext. I'm upset because it's upsetting. Yeah.
Yeah, something I quote all the time from you when I'm having conversations about this question is that in one of your latest books, They'll Beat the Memory Out of Us, you'd have some line that's basically like, if we do an effective tactic, it will become a crime. And like that idea that we just all need to keep not breaking the law and not doing anything bad because we would provoke the police is so victimly, because the repression will come if we're doing anything that stops their like hideous gecocidal racist regimes. And it's so wet to watch people be convinced to blame themselves and pacify themselves, and then also blame other people in their movements who are actually taking brave, bold, risky action. Like, whether or not you want to take that action, the right move is to care for anyone who's willing to take actions that may be more effective at stopping our opponents.
Absolutely. And the more you think about it, it's also very clearly a middle class perspective, because it comes from this idea, and the assumption itself is wrong, but it's very much a class inflected idea that we have enough. We have what we need. And what we need to do is just prevent some unsavory political force from taking what we have, whether it's our healthcare. And clearly, we both have easy access to healthcare, whether it's, affordable housing that we don't have to continuously, that we just own the house, which obviously we do. We don't, we're not chained to like wage labor in order to make rental payments or mortgage payments or whatever. That's clearly a pretty middle class way of understanding the world, that we have what we need, but we just need to be reasonable, make sure the right people get elected, get our lawyers, to make legal challenges to these encroachments on our rights and our, what we deserve. If we actually look at, let's look at the territory where we were both born, like, like North America, the state and laws, like, in the Western sense of, legality, came to North America, at the point of a sword, the barrel of a gun, and, distributed alongside smallpox blankets. All of that is like stolen land. And, it's not our ancestors whose land was stolen, but like, if we imagine like less of the middle class perspective and more like the perspective of people whose lands were stolen, and that's not, by any means unique. Maybe it could be, your family or your chosen family or were gentrified out of a neighborhood. Maybe it's that you just weren't able to stay in a place because you couldn't afford it, and you had a health problem and you had to move somewhere else because, the house doesn't belong to the person who lives in it. It belongs to the person with like a piece of paper. How are you going to get that back? How are you going to take back the thing that really is a part of you, that's like a part of your life, by like appealing to the conscience of the same institutions that stole it? And I think that is much more reflective of the reality in one way or another, from one historical thread or another, of most people on the planet. Not this idea that we have enough, we're fine, and we just need to erect like a civil barrier against further encroachments.
Yeah. One question that comes up a lot when I'm traveling around and sharing these kinds of ideas is, someone will be very earnest, thoughtful organizer is like, well, I don't know what to do, because when we organize public events, we're scared that people will come and do more bold tactics, and that will provoke the police and it'll make other people unsafe. So we can't invite everyone. And the way I usually answer that, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, because I think you a lot of experience in more places in the world on this. My take on that usually is like, yeah, you can't know what's going to happen at this event. Like, the police may pop off at anybody for anything, and people may come and do a variety of tactics, and you definitely can't control that. So you should always prepare everyone to have tactics for trying to protect people from the police, regardless of who you wish would come. And then not wanting people to come and do a variety of tactics, what is that doing in terms of like trying to prevent our movements from being as forceful and effective as possible? But even if you're not sure which tactics work and you just know you love certain tactics, you still can't promise anyone safety from the police. So this tactics, the attempt to become obsessed with like, can we get the black bloc not to come to our march, instead of how can we get everyone who's coming to our march or our rally to have some safety planning about protecting vulnerable people, or getting people out if needed, or getting people out of the custody of the police if that's possible, or like whatever else would be what's our jail support plan. Since you can never guarantee anybody, even if there is no protest going on, that the police are not going to hurt them or pick them out. And so I just like, I have this feeling that it misdirects us towards each other and away from the police.
Yeah, I think that's a really smart way to talk about it. You're absolutely right. The idea that we could guarantee that the police are not going to attack or kill or imprison people is absurd. As long as there are police, they will be doing these things. I guess I dream of struggles, of movements in which people accept that we're never all going to agree, but we have a minimum of solidarity. We're never going to be on the side of the cops. It would be so beautiful if we could have a protest and some people are there attacking, and they start attacking the cops or, setting fire to a bank or a Tesla or something like that. And maybe some of the people throwing rocks, instead of throwing them from like the front and very second line, which are the best places to throw from, they're throwing from farther back. And then they hit some people, like some actual people, some people who are in the protest or some neighbors and not cops. A situation in which others or the whole could respond to that by first off making sure that no one gets arrested, anyone who actually gets hurt, that they get whatever medical care that they need, making sure no one gets denounced in the media, and then in that more trusting setting can give criticism to folks who are doing things in like a bad way, and then those folks can hear it not with the defensivity because they know, okay, I disagree a lot of times with these people or we have different focus or whatever, but I know that they would never turn me over to the cops. I know that they would never expose me to oppression by denouncing me in the media. And maybe I can confront the fact that like, shoot, I was like throwing things from like way back in the crowd because I was afraid of getting closer to the cops. It's so easy to not confront our fears and to like avoid them by like blaming someone else or, oh, those fucking pacifists, those fucking liberals. Like, and there are so many people who deserve that kind of response because they actually will use very dishonest, reasoning because basically they don't want anyone to fight back against oppression, actually, because they're comfortable enough, or maybe because they're scared of it. And it's scary to admit that we're scared. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I would love a movement in which we can actually make criticisms that are coming from an honest place where we're able to see those criticisms, try them on for size, see what we can learn from them, admit that we're afraid, admit that we're all going to mess up, admit that we're never going to agree about everything, and that's fine. I'd also love for there to be protests where folks who are more inclined to, those kinds of actions, they know that that they stay calm in physically dangerous situations. They have some experience with how the police move. Maybe, they've been involved in self-defense, whether that's like, training in a gym setting or whether that's just because like they grew up in a situation where they knew that sometimes they'd have to deal with like a knife being pulled on or a gun being pulled on them. Folks like that going into protests, like in relation with and prepared to folks who really have a lot. I mean, we all have a lot to lose, but who are making a decision that we can trust, that they don't want to be directly in the face of a police charge, or that if there's the potential for a mass arrest situation, we got to get these people out. No one wants to be arrested, but if the difference is, you're going to get deported, or, you're lower class, working class, you're going to lose your job, like some of the other folks can sit a night in prison and face these charges. And we should never pretend like, oh, privilege means like you're going to be fine in prison. Like, I'm white, I had a lot of support, I was in prison. Like, it's not, no one is fine in prison unless you're like in for a financial crime and you're rich and you're like going exclusively to like a minimum security prison camp. But some people have more resources that make it that they're probably going to have fewer consequences. And so like, what if you had people who, are experienced at fighting back and, decide like, at this point in my life or at this particular protest, I don't need to be starting anything. I'll be on standby. And if we got to bust these people through a police line to make sure that they get away safely, if we have to take a charge so that other folks who, for a million legitimate reasons don't want to be the first line that the cops are beating on, like that, that would also be like a really beautiful way to show up.
Yeah. I mean, one thing I think about a lot, I think sometimes people are like, yeah, people who want to turn up their tactics should just do that at a separate time from like whatever, the big march or the big rally. And what you just described to me is actually the reverse. It's safer for everyone if there's more of us there and can actually try to make it so nobody gets arrested like that. And just if more people are willing, it's like, yeah, I think there's so many historical examples, so many contemporary examples that the idea of leaving people taking the biggest risks alone to do it is just not a good one.
It's a bad idea. And if I can really quickly interject, movements that are centered around protests that are massive and completely peaceful tend to kill themselves very quickly. Usually, no one's going to die in the moment, but you lose the movement, you lose the momentum because people get walking around in circles in the street if they're getting on one level or another isn't actually going to change something. Maybe the first time you go can be a really meaningful experience for you if you've never had anything like that. But the second, the third time, you realize this isn't changing anything.
I mean, that makes me think also that's something we talked about earlier today. It's so important that we go to those big moments and actually recruit people deeper into them. I think a lot of people right now are showing, especially since 2020, showing up to that stuff on the street. Go, if I'm trying to do my thing, I'm trying to get involved, but they don't meet anybody. Then we actually want people to get deeper into actual community projects and to affinity groups and places where they can expand their solidarity, learn more political ed through new friends. Like, I think we can use those sites as recruitment spaces, and we should. But yeah, the effectiveness is so limited. I'm curious if you have experiences with that, or like stories, or just like how do we get more people who are newly waking up deeper into it?
Yeah, I don't want to be nitpicky about words, especially because since I know you, I know that you're not using the word in this way, but I think it can be really helpful to make a distinction between recruitment and invitation or relationship building. And the reason that I think that's important is because unfortunately there are a lot of people kind of like more like, old school leftists or whatever, who do what they are there for is recruitment. And it's like recruitment, I probably originally military term, you have an organization, it's hierarchical, that already exists. The new people coming in are not going to change that organization. They're certainly not invited to change it. They're there to build the power of the organization. And I know, I know that that's not your approach to revolution, but I want to offer that distinction to anyone listening, because I think I think the best way to go about it is as an invitation, as opening the door to a potential relationship. And for it to be like a real relationship, like built on reciprocity, that means you're also open to change. That means you're open to conflict, to distance, to maybe deciding that after you get to know them better, you don't really want to work with this person. But getting an invitation is so meaningful, especially in such an alienated society. And I'm glad that you asked, because it's making me realize, of all of the different protests and possibly hypothetically riots that I've been to in my life, I can definitely think of a few stories, but so many times that I didn't think about how important it was to do this. One time, running from the cops, I ended up in a tree with someone, and we were hiding. There were police helicopters, police snatch squads, and we had a really good conversation. Or another time, folks were giving, just folks in the neighborhood were giving us clothes to kind of change out of the black bloc clothing and to be able to hide better in the neighborhood. How nice would it have been to lower the adrenaline, realize look around, the situation is relatively safe. I can spend a minute finding a safe where you exchange contact information with this person and follow up with it without thank you, you saved my ass from real charges. Or going and I think about this as I don't know if I'm getting older or if it was just the chemo, but someone, who has had health problems, and yeah, I've had problems and I often just don't show up ready to roll. It's good for people to learn how to inhabit different roles. And sometimes often especially when I have a crew of friends and we could kind of write texts together, edit them together, print them out. It was really nice going to these places ready for a variety of things, including having some short little flyers talking about why we need to be able to kick the police out of our neighborhoods, how that gives us the opportunity for transformation, and then also include in their invitations for if you don't feel your role is directly fighting the police, bring something to help transform the space when we actually seize it, and see the folks fighting the police as your friends who open a possibility for you to do public artwork with no permission, or to hold a workshop, or, right in the middle of a, big old avenue or whatever you want. And also for the folks who are inclined towards that role of kicking state power out of a whole city block, a whole neighborhood, to see the other folks as their friends just because they're not, also throwing rocks or whatever. Yeah, I guess the thinking about the times when I was going ready to communicate with people and share this radical flyers in a way that's not a sort of mainstream education, universities, public school. They teach us that education is a pyramid with steps going up it, and I think that's bullshit. And I think it's really, really helpful for us all to find ways, whatever it is that we do, whatever it is that we think we're good at, or whatever it is that we know that we have experience with or that we're inclined towards, finding ways to communicate that's not like a 101 and then a 201, where with each level, we're leaving out other things and expecting people to be sort of kind of more like drawn up this ladder. But at every, not level, but at every moment, we try to find ways to indicate other paths, to indicate how this, it can never be everything, how this little fragment is interlaced with other fragments that are out there because of the context. Say it's early in the anti-cop, in the latest iteration of an anti-cop movement, say it's like 2010 or 2014, and we decided it's a good idea to distribute flyers about why like holding hands and just making like human chains and sitting down isn't going to be enough to stop police violence. We need to think about abolition. And so, we're kind of indicating there's a path for people who want to explore like what is this idea of abolishing the police. We need to be able to hold ground and defend ourselves from police attacks. There's another path for people who want to learn those kind of tactics. We need to be able to attack the business interests that very much love the police and that are often calling the police to disappear houseless people, to disappear folks who are having a huge fucking crisis and having a meltdown in public space, which, we should be doing that in our mansions, right? To disappear, to erase, to assault Black people, trans people, and also be able to take the initiative and chase the police out of our neighborhoods, off of our streets. And there's another path that they could look at, or also how important it is to have folks who are, ready to give first aid, who are ready to transform a space, all of these different things. Like we can never mention all the paths, but at the very least to like put out these little suggestions, and then they need to find ways to relate. Yeah.
Yeah. My experiences of that have often been showing up to big events or protests or marches, or like also a lot of queer, prides and things like that, trans prides, with stickers, because people love to be given a cute thing. Or like you had matchbooks for a while, then had like a message about Palestine and pinkwashing, when that was something a lot of people like had never thought of, who were gathering in queer spaces, and also an invitation to something. Like I feel like my dream would be that everybody gets to the march where they were in danger of ending up being kind of in a passive role. And instead experiences, they were invited to do an art thing. They were invited to come to a cool meeting.
Yes.
They were invited to do something that involved care. Like they were going to make food for folks, or there was going to be a banner up. Like they were invited to 5 things by 5 different friendly people with cute different graphics. And so that the thing that appeals to them, they could try it. Because also people don't take every invitation, right? There's a bunch of different chemistry and fear and so many things that go into that. And I want everyone to feel like they could come up with that invitation before they go. Even if they're going to the protest alone, they can make a flyer and invite people to be like, meet at the library lawn next Tuesday for anyone who wants to talk about anything at all. That's any aspect of life, or alienation, or doing some project together, or I'm reading this book, or you, or like whatever.
I love that idea.
I appreciate the word recruitment. It's so funny. I'm being influenced by my 1990s experience of the Lesbian Offenders slogan, "We recruit." Because it's very good, like pushing back on homophobia and being like, yeah, we were actually out here turning people gay. It's like, it is a military Shermanite, and it does that on the whole other leftist.
But I mean, in that case, what you're recommending, I mean, that's just like funny. That's like,
I know, but not everybody was a lesbian. There's a pint. Think about that. You said something at the beginning that I feel is something that's coming up a lot at the events I'm doing, is I hear people ask very exasperated questions about like the thing they're frustrated having to say over and over again. And oftentimes there's a lot of resentment. Like a lot of people I meet, they're coming to my events because they're masked events, and they're like, I'm so frustrated. Nothing in my supposedly radical community is masked. I'm so sick of having to ask people for this and nobody listens to me. It could be anything. We spend our life repeating ourselves.
Yeah.
And I think most of being an organizer or being radical or doing political ed is like repeating the same ideas your entire life and somehow trying to enjoy that and feel energy around it. And you do so much communicating of radical ideas and have been for so long, and they never expire. Like your critiques from the 2005 book are very live right now. So I'm just kind of curious, like, how do you fuel that? How do you avoid resentment in that? Or how do you manage resentment or other sensations and feelings that come with like having to repeat yourself your entire life?
generally done a very bad job of that. So I think it's actually good that you asked that.
You seem so graceful in this to me. That's so interesting.
It took a whole lot getting to a place where I could say that gracefully and even like recognize like, I mean, fuck, where to start. There's all the times when I've been just extremely like exhausted, depressed, even suicidal by how like, because I tend that way, that's like a part of who I am, like really strong ups and downs, and also because like it's fucking exhausting. It just causes so much despair, like living in this world and like seeing these things that are happening and like seeing like most people turn their backs or like go for the easy solutions that are just so obviously not going to work. For the most part, I had that, which every time like another comrade commits suicide, like it's those of us who like hide it and kind of only come out when, you know, we can be like a little bit more within like the norms of like acceptable emotionality. Um, you know, I mean, that's a survival strategy, but like how much are you like helping other people like when we're hiding that like that is a part of our lives is like crushing depression and desperation. So many times I channel it through anger and I get like angry at people who don't deserve it. We're brought up in a society that is designed to keep us in this place where we're on the treadmill reproducing this society. And sometimes I think there are instances when people like need like a little bit of like a what the fuck are we talking about? But there's so many more times when we all need patience, when we all need someone who like has the grace to say like, I think I know where you're coming from, but I would really like you to consider how much you're just regurgitating something that has been fed to you by like the institutional counterpart of these fascists you're currently protesting. I would like you to consider the fact that your entire sense of like movement history is maybe based on a lot of manipulations that are everywhere because they have the money, they have the resources. And I'd really love for you to consider these other sources and these other accounts and see if like, you know, after you look into those, you have the same ideas or if maybe you're open to changing those. And also if all you're interested in doing is just reading tweets and being on social media, then like, fuck off. I don't have time for that because you're choosing never to have a deeper understanding of the world. And I'm not going to waste time with you. Good luck. Like, is that like a possible range? Um, and oh, the last thing that I wanted to say about that, it's also really helpful, I think, for all of us to reflect. I'm repeating this over and over and over and over again. Am I missing something?
Yeah.
Am I stuck in a kind of like curriculum-based understanding of learning and education where like this is the structure for learning, this is what's true? Are my methods of communication like not the best? Is it just the case of like we live in a world in which everyone is like taught very untrue and harmful things? And so is it inevitable that there's going to be a lot of misunderstandings around that? Okay, so then maybe it is worthwhile to like repeat these messages again and again, but maybe am I still kind of stuck responding to like a context that doesn't exist anymore? I don't think nonviolence is ever going to be right. Like it's not going to, you know, change the fact that it's based on falsified histories or on accommodating ourselves to power. But maybe a lot of like the relevant concerns or the things that are drawing people there are changing in a way that I'm not seeing. And I need to like learn how to like pivot to that and listen to like what people's concerns are now.
Yeah. No, that's such a hard one because, of course, we all want to stop violence. I mean, they just, you know what I mean? It just, there's like such a deep misunderstanding. Like our heart's desire to stop the violence we have experienced or stop violence we see in front of us, that really gets entangled in with no one should defend themselves. I mean, it's not me. I think there's like something in the resentment. I think there can be a practice that I don't know. I wonder, I see it in you and I see it in myself, like a desire to communicate about radical liberatory ideas that has to include a willingness to encounter people who are encountering it for the first time. And then, I mean, I just think right now that the recent movies you made with submedia that are like, so they take the ideas from your book, The Solutions Are Already Here, which I love that book, and they make them into like charismatic videos that are like just, they're wonderful for the classroom, they're wonderful for reading groups, they're for great people who don't want to read books, or they're great supplement or complement to a book. And that kind of like urgency, like we have to get this out in every way we can, in every genre. Your books are in so many different registers, like Worshipping Power is, much harder reading than The Solutions Are Already Here or How Nonviolence Protects the State or The Failure of Nonviolence. Anyway, I'm just thinking about this life purpose feeling around wanting liberation. And I'm wondering, my desire for all people in our community is that we can tune into that, because it is a very disappointing time to be alive. It's very easy to be disappointed and resentful with other people because we're all so deeply imperfect and things are so fully not where they need to be for us to mount the resistance we need for the conditions as they are. And so, yeah, like, even, would you say a few words about, you said like, oh, I'm better than I used to be, or like about this resentment or this, what kinds of things do you do to orient towards that generosity and away from the resentment, or how to hold the anger in a way that loves yourself and also moves you to still be able to do the work you want to do? Like, if there's anything you want to share about how you do that.
Noticing friends who I really respect, noticing how they move through the world, listening to criticism, like understanding that like I don't have to be like those friends, but like if I can't learn anything from them, then that's like a big problem with me. Because like on an abstract level, like I know that like I wouldn't want everyone to be like me, or to that definitely not to be like me, and also like not to like focus on the things that I focus on or have like the same exact approach to struggle. But like I guess trying to understand like what's missing from my focus, or what's like underrepresented in my focus, and then like seeing, instead of which is better, like where there's like really good complementarity with other focuses. um People who are like really good at empathy and generosity, people who have like really good hearts, people who like take care of others, learning from them, noticing how they're often exploited and undervalued and invisibilized in a lot of our movements. And then you go to another corner of the movement, and actually either folks who legitimately are like really, really good at that, or the folks who are good at branding and good at talking about that are the ones with like the kind of, more power. Seeing also how in those other corners of the movement, they actually need to think more about, not care, but fighting back, self-defense, sabotage, things like that, and seeing how we're actually all stronger when those things, instead of in competition, or like in really like close relationship. But like especially like, yes, conflict is inevitable, but thinking about like some of the bad conflicts that I've been in, and like stepping out of like a blame framework, and like kind of looking at like challenging my own experience of it, and naming the narratives that I had, like when I was like, going through like, oh, this person, is just like being terrible, or, just wants to like, can't accept this other thing. And then seeing like how like, okay, trying to imagine what their experience was, how I could have acted differently that might like change how the whole thing. I guess I'm being, and yeah, it's kind of hard to talk about like in the abstract.
There's something about what you're saying that I feel like leads to a couple of things you said, like the hypothetical you gave at the beginning about people throwing rocks from the back and making the action less safe for others, and like what it means to be in community enough and have enough solidarity that we can be permeable to each other's critiques and feedback.
Yeah.
And like so much of what you're saying is about like being able to hear people's feedback, and also being trustworthy enough that people should hear our feedback because we've actually shown solidarity. Like, just, I feel like that we talked about earlier today about like accountability and how vague and limited some of the uses of that in our communities are. But I'm just thinking so much about how really what accountability requires is a genuine curiosity to understand how I've impacted you, and to listen to you say it. It doesn't mean I have to believe every single thing you said, or that it's all grounded, or that parts of it might not be your reactivity, but that I'm gonna like, if we're in community together, even if I don't really like you, I'm going to give it a shot to find out how I can chew on this feedback you're giving, even if you gave it to me mean, and talk to my friends about it and just be like, well, if Peter has given me this feedback, it might mean that we are in some kind of relationship that matters to Peter at least, and should matter to me, and I'm being somehow called upon to be curious about what's going on here and how I am impacting others that I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know everything already. I think that's really hard for us, in part because of a culture where we want to already be right and perfect. And like, it's devastatingly, like we're so hard on ourselves with it. I mean, you've been you've been targeted by people your whole life for doing radical work. You have been like edgy in terms of what you've been willing to say and push for, and you've been willing to say it and publish about it. And so you've received a lot of grounded and ungrounded feedback, and like, just, I didn't hear any people have really come after you. And I've seen that while I've been aware of your work. And I'm curious how you hold, like, what you've learned about how, like, when to respond and not respond. Like, a question people ask me a lot since this book came out is like, how do I know when to leave a relationship with a group or a person because it's just like toxic? Or how do I know I'm uncomfortable but I should hang in and like try to learn? And I'm just curious, like, you've just been down a lot of fucking roads with this, and what you're noticing in your own experience or others, like, what, if you have any advice for people in general about this, like, when to turn away.
Yeah. I guess I can think about like 3, call them, like, group breakups that I've been through. In one of them, it was, so I'm not going to name places or times. I was part of it was not any kind of organization, but like a loose, group, or, just people who knew each other and who were doing a lot of the same things. And a lot of it was very, very, very effective at intensifying the struggle and making the struggle stronger, creating new possibilities, increasing our ability to push back state power. But that also kind of had built within that, like, the kind of dominant approach to the practice, or like the majority approach to the practice, had a lot of elements that were so self-isolating that kind of created a hard limit. So it's like, we're getting this feedback of, like feedback in a more literal sense, not like, people are telling us, but like we are seeing like this is working, like, but then it's less visible how we're setting like a hard limit that, we're going to butt up against. I wrote a criticism of that, and it was really fucking arrogant, like how the criticism is phrased. I still believe, like, from everything that I saw and everything that I've seen since in similar instances, that like the criticism is like technically correct, but partly from anger, partly from ego, and partly from like dumb writing styles that we learn sometimes, I wrote it in a way that wasn't empathetic, wasn't generous, that was, in certain ways overstating the case, and in other ways was just like arrogant and obnoxious. And I know that there are some of the people who, and these, were some of them friends and all of them comrades, some of them were never going to hear it. Some of them were always going to like respond to it in shitty ways, accepting that I can't control that, but that I could control how I communicated my criticism. I did it in a really bad way, and not as many bridges would have been burned. There wouldn't have been so much silence afterwards, and I would have been able to have really good conversations that I would have learned from after that if I had like communicated in a different way. So that was one case where I was sort of like, let's say, shut out of a relationship with this group. And I regret how I did that. Like, my part in that. Also, like, I'm not sure to what extent most of the group was really like, invested in like seeing things that they weren't doing well, ego, the rest of the group. But yeah, they basically ended up in the predictable way of like completely isolating themselves and like getting to a place where they lost any effectiveness on the world around them. If I didn't learn anything, then I'd be like, I was right, and fuck them. But like, if I were like, wait, no, what I actually want is for us all to do better, recognizing that I actually didn't really help, and, recognizing that like, it's not a good thing if my movement enemies have fucked themselves over, because like, we had enough fucking enemies. There was one time, another time when I was the one who kind of left a group because I thought they were wrong about like some theoretical strategic questions. And I didn't really like some of the ways that communication was happening, or how people were sort of like shutting down or ignoring certain proposals and whatnot. And I left. I found people to work with that I had a lot more affinity with. And I later really, really regretted that, because after a while I realized, like, regardless of our differences, like, these were lovely, caring, sincere, intelligent people. Fortunately, a number of them are like still really good friends, but like there never would have been that distance if I just allowed for difference, if I had allowed for disagreement, and if I had been brave enough to make more engaged criticisms rather than like a sort of like either silence. I don't even remember what I did, if I was just like, bah humbug and left, or if I made a sort of like more denunciatory, abstract criticism. Like if I like treated them like friends and be like, hey, I don't like this, and hey, I would like you to reconsider this. And if we don't agree, that's okay. But at the very least, we're strengthening our relationship by like trusting each other enough to support each other in criticism. And I was just kind of like afraid to do that. So I kind of fell to one of the two typical models of either just like, silently, smoke bomb and disappearing, or like, a kind of like bullshit, like, you are wrong, kind of whatever declaration. I don't remember what the third example was, but this might be good enough.
Yeah, that's really helpful. I just am like so interested in these emotional tendencies and just like having total compassion for ourselves, that our tendencies are to do things like disappear or slide into grandiosity or arrogance with a criticism. And also, like, especially for people who have radical perspectives, it's fucking lonely. And we often may be carrying damage around belonging because we don't belong in family and school and so many social groups because we believe something or experience something that is so countercultural. And then when we find our people, our same protective mechanisms often just come up again. And then we, bail or don't give the feedback and disappear, or sit and ruminate and be resentful and feel better than others, or give a big truth-telling speech and walk out. And like all of those things, of course, like don't go over well. And it's really hard to just be like, I'm hanging in here with you and I'm going to tell you what I really think and I'm going to listen to you and I'm still going to hold my truth and I'm going to listen to you. Like that's so, and I'm going to be like, it's possible that I'll learn something from you, but actually open to your side of it. And I'm also looking for like, even if we disagree, how much can our roads still lie together? Like, can we do stuff together, even if we can't resolve this? Because we probably can't resolve every difference. And watching people fall out over the words on the banner, just like it's, it's agony.
Like a sort of, I guess, like a theoretical model that I can't remember. So I don't think I've like invented any idea. I don't think I've said it. Like everyone all the time is like saying like new formations of past utterances and insights. But like something that I found that has so many precedents, but that's been really useful for me. And I don't remember if I kind of first developed this and the solutions are already here or another one, but it doesn't matter. Is like this figure of like the ecosystem of revolt. And I've already heard some people use that term in the wrong way. And I'm just gonna flat out say there's a wrong, like, don't turn this into a fucking cliche. There's like a wrong way to do this. This is not just like, a new word or a new term for like the same old leftist organizing style with like nice, friendly, colorful, kind of hippie-ish, like smoothed edges. I think it's an ecosystem if we have a lot of completely different beings, some of whom are at odds, some of whom are in conflict, some of whom like are occasionally killing each other, but that recognize that at like the base level, we give each other life. Like we like together are the foundation that we're all standing on. We together are the air that we're all breathing. We together are the food that we're all eating. And recognizing that it's not about being the most right and spreading our species or our role in that ecosystem to the mountain. We, to a certain extent, yes, but not so that it's like, the only like, the kudzu that, overtakes the whole thing. So that we completely eliminate the imaginaries or the goals of unity. Unity is out the door. Unity is fucking poisonous. Having to be in agreement out the door. But also like this relativism, everything is okay, because like the toxic sludge factory that gives us all cancer and kills us all, that is not a part of an ecosystem. That destroys ecosystem, that destroys life. Also like we all have to, follow Marx and follow Lenin. Let's look at how they operated within a revolutionary ecosystem. They fucking killed it. Let's be honest. I've been talking too much about nonviolence. I should be talking more about like the authoritarian left. That is death to struggle. They don't deserve any more chances. Do people who fall into that deserve our patience and our compassion? Let's get to know them and find out if they do, or if they're just politicians. If they're politicians, we can't really deal with them as people because they're giving up their personhood for power. If there are people who are making bank, getting like a like really like highly paid income as like the executive at an NGO making six figures, and they're spewing this garbage, I at least am going to make the barrier that they don't deserve my patience. But all of the other people that they're like paid to give all these resources to say, oh yeah, this great revolution, the USSR was wonderful, like Leninism, it works. We can't be all chaotic. We have to be organized. Let's, recruit you, join this organization. Like, I think those people deserve patience, but that doesn't mean validating that idea. History, sadly, has given us so many examples to see what is the range of possibilities that Marxism, that state-oriented revolutions, like revolutions that try to reform the state or create a new state, we can see how that turns out. It never turns out the exact same way, but it never turns out well. It never turns out well, and we don't have the time to trust that one more time. So like, we need to be able to say, no, you cannot be a part of this ecosystem because like, you can't be a part of any ecosystem. You devour, you destroy, you poison. And then that's also dangerous because then that same kind of rhetorical model could be used for like, a damaged person who like, in, their current place in life, they're actually like hurting other people and they're like making the ecosystem unhealthier. So there the question is like, is this someone who's capable of change, or have they been offered power and money to hurt people or to control, to destroy, to homogenize? Have they made that choice? Like, not like, someone who makes bad choices because like they don't have like, access to food or like, basic conditions of survival. That's so different from someone choosing like a
Job as a cop. Or
job as a cop or like, a huge fat paycheck. Are they capable of changing, or have they chosen this from like a range of choices? Yeah, I'm going on too long, but like, yeah, we can't be afraid of saying like, this is incompatible with life. This is incompatible with liberation. And then like learning, and you learn by walking, learning over time, like, where is this just like me strongly disagreeing with their strategy? And maybe I'm right, but it's not going to be the end of the world if they follow their strategy because they're still in a place where they can learn. They're not creating a machine. Once it's a machine, then it's just chugging ahead, and it can't, like a train can't decide to like climb a tree. It's going down the tracks. That's how it works. That's the only way it works. If I can give a real quick example of that, the 15N movement, the Plaza Occupation movement, that was largely influenced by the Arab Spring, and that was a major influence for the Occupy movement in the States. In Barcelona, it moved in really, really anarchist liberatory directions, even though the thing was designed by like naive progressives who were kind of, who trusted the state and basically wanted to just reform the state. It was a lot easier to move that in like a really anarchist direction in Barcelona because showed up the very first night when the call out was put out, where, myself included, most of the rest of us were like, this is bullshit. Like, why go there? The challenges that those kind of more, open-minded or tolerant, or, maybe even just kind of more lefty, less radical anarchists, the challenges that they brought by showing up there helped create an ecosystem that brought together over months, hundreds of thousands of people who were learning so much about liberation, about connectedness, about caring for one another, about taking over a large part of the city and getting to know one another, talking with one another. And I'm sure that some of like the people who really supported this original call out for a very like democratic in the worst sense of the word, like a very statist centralizing social experiment, I'm sure that a lot of them learned and like moved in much better directions. So they were, I think, trying to fine tune the train. They were trying to help fix the train. And I guess maybe for the ecosystemic approach, recognizing that like not all of them, but a lot of them had really, really good intentions, and that they could become more and more a part of like a healthy ecosystem the more that they realize that they should dedicate their energies not to taking care of a train, but to taking care of the soil, the air, and all the rest of it.
digging up the tracks.
Yeah.
I want to recommend to people listening that if they haven't read your book, The Failure of Nonviolence, there's some really good stuff in there that influenced my thinking about what it means when people take over public space and what kinds of things happen. And you get some of the analysis of the M15 movement. Something about what you're saying makes me think of two tendencies I see. There's a liberal tendency sometimes to be like, let 1,000 flowers bloom, and be like insufficiently discerning about the fact that things are fucking different. If you want to go work on a bill to train cops and I'm over here trying to like, get rid of the police station. These are not like just two different strategies in the same movement. And like abolitionism has given us that kind of criteria for understanding. But I think more broadly, there's particular tactics in our societies in this moment in racial capitalism and neoliberalism that like people gravitate to because they've mostly not heard of other things, and they take up all the option and they take up a ton of work, electoralism, like certain things that involve appealing to authority to change its mind rather than things that involve taking and making what we need and attacking them. And like, it's just not all equal. So for me, that like the critique you're making of some ways people would use the term ecosystem to pretend we can just let 1,000 flowers bloom and it's all equal and never criticize each other and never notice those imbalances. And then the other side would be people who are like utterly rigid and perfectionist and trying to find out who here is impure and only spend their time calling out others for not being radical enough and are not doing enough work to invite people to learn about the parts that are less. No, it's like, I do think it makes sense that a lot of people, when they first wake up to politicization in our societies, will turn towards electoralism or will turn towards appealing to corporate elites or appealing to NGOs. Like, of course, because that's what's known. So it's like how to find a balance in ourselves. Am I demonstrating one or the other of these tendencies? Like, I'm just out for the fight and to prove that I'm right, or I'm just out to never have to disagree with anyone and have 1,000 flowers bloom, and just noticing if we have, sometimes that can be like actually like a trauma-centered tendency around appease, or it can be a belonging wound that makes me want to be part of a special group that are the only ones who know and make sure that we kick anyone out who's a threat to us.
Yeah.
Or it can be wanting to get the approval of people who have more power than me. I don't know. I just feel like that so many conflicts, and I see this a lot in the recent uprisings, like the recent, the encampments and other methods being used in the US around Palestine solidarity. There is a lot of debate about tactics that's actually really good. I'm so glad people are debating about tactics, and I think a lot of people are getting deeply politicized by those debates. And the more we can like really have them and notice if we're going to these either liberal places or places where we're not giving people a chance to get political ed about what they are likely to not know, that the U.S. society is because of liberalism. It's hard. I mean, it's a hard balance.
Yeah, for sure.
You were talking a little bit earlier about how badly we need to do care and how badly we also need to fight back, and how those things are often siloed like camps or parts of our movements. And several months ago, I asked you if you would give me commentary on and feedback and critique around my book Mutual Aid, because I'm writing in, a new edition. And you gave me this like really useful image, and I wondered if you would share, I use like right away in the beginning of the new introduction to the book, and I wondered if you would like share this image about the factory and like what it means about this settling of care and fighting back.
So yeah, I think it's a simplification, but a fairly accurate metaphor to say that like living on this planet that is ruled by the state and capitalism is a lot like living just downstream from a factory that just churns out toxic sludge. And some of us, the ones, who don't have any access to like a well a little bit higher up the stream, have more access to less polluted water. Others are just drinking the sludge. Some of us are dying more quickly. Others are dying more slowly. But it's, this factory is poisoning, destroying the conditions of life for all of us. Some people have the very reasonable response to try to clean out the water, to try to create water filters, to set up clinics to deal with, the cancers and, the huge variety of health problems that are coming out of this. I'm going to maybe even complexify it a little bit more than when I shared it with you. And then other people are taking what should be a common sense approach of destroying the fucking factory, learning how to overcome the force of any mercenary group that, might coincidentally all be there in uniforms and badges defending the factory. Because if anyone decides to make their money defending that factory, then they have chosen jobs that make our lives impossible. And so that the validity of that choice is something that we shouldn't negate and refuse to accept. But, unfortunately, the factory owners also teach us that it is wrong it's okay to put poison in water, but it is not okay to go and hit someone over the head. And most people, I don't think it would be okay for me to go and hit over the head, but someone who's poisoning my water, or someone who's a mercenary for someone poisoning my water, if that's the only way, if I've asked them and they're not going to stop, I'm not, why should we just die? Like, recognizing this right that they've invented for themselves. So there's already that inequality of what society says is an acceptable response. And we live in this society in which, at the most basic level, going in and destroying the factory is completely criminalized and portrays this horrific, senseless act. But then, like, the different ways of responding with healing and with care and with prevention and stuff like that, there's also like a huge legitimacy ranking there. Making a really, great high income by running a clinic that like treats all the diseases that are coming from this factory is definitely much more valued than helping people create their own water filters to have like slightly less poisoned water. And it's much more valued than like, kind of free clinic type approaches of like healthcare that is not turned into a commodity, healthcare that is shared and available to everyone. But at the end of the day, what use is it to continue cleaning the water and to continue doing our best to survive these cancers and to heal ourselves if we're going to leave the factory there churning out poison? And at the same time, what use is it to destroy the factory if we're not also going to learn how to heal ourselves, how to clean our water? I mean, you could say, yeah, well, after, 1,000 years, like the water will be clean. Like, that's not really good enough for me. So I think we really need to see what are the different ways of participating in struggle that actually make the world better, that actually increase our chances for collective survival, that actually increase our ability to like take care of the ecosystems that are our homes, that we're taught to like treat as something external of, nature, which is not a human thing, or something that is, irrelevant or completely invisibilized, to recognize like that's our fucking home and like we are a part of it and we need to take care of it. We need to take care of ourselves. We need to take care of each other, and we need to destroy everything that is either a machine that can only destroy the conditions for life, whether that's the state, whether that's capitalism and all these industrial structures. And yeah, we need to fight against those structures that are killing us and that are oppressing us and making life impossible.
We ended the interview shortly after that last question because the camera we were using ran out of space. So I just want to say here that it was so wonderful to get to talk to Peter, and I'm so grateful for him taking the time to share his experiences and reflections. I always learn something really profound whenever I engage with Peter's thinking. I also want to thank Senem Karamam for doing the audio and video recording of the interview. Thank you for joining me for the latest episode of Love in a Fucked Up World. This podcast is based on my book of the same name, which is now out from Algonquin Press. I hope you'll pick it up from an independent bookstore in your community, and please don't buy it from Amazon or Audible. Love in a Fucked Up World is hosted by me, Dean Spade. It is produced and edited by Hope Dector. Our creative director is Ciro Carrillo. Thank you to Eugene, Derek, Kelsey, Lindsay, Jessica, Raindrop, Nicole, and everyone else who helped us with this podcast, including the cat that's crying outside. Our theme music is I've Been Wondering by The Ballet. We need each other now more than ever, and I hope this podcast offers tools and ideas that can help us build and sustain strong relationships and strong movements. I hope you'll keep listening, subscribe, and share this episode with the people in your life.